The hostess put her palm against the air between us, looked my pressed old uniform up and down, and said, loud enough for the nearest table to hear, "Wait by the door, ma'am. You're nobody here." She was maybe 24. She did not know my name was already printed inside the program, folded in her other hand, 3 lines down, in gold ink. She did not know what I carried in my clutch, or that before the dessert plates were cleared, every person smiling behind her would know both. I stepped to the side the way you step aside for a gurney, without a word, and let the people behind me move past. Her name tag said, Brielle. Gold letters, pinned crooked over a navy dress that cost more than my Buick is worth. Behind her, the ballroom of the Broadway Hotel glittered. 40 tables under 3 big chandeliers. White roses on everyone. Men in dark suits, women in gowns worth a year of my pension. Outside, downtown Columbus was thick with April heat off the river. Inside, it smelled like cut flowers and warming butter and somebody's expensive perfume. A woman at the nearest table lifted her wine and said to her friend, not quietly, "Bless her heart." Somebody's grandmother wandered in from the VFW. Her friend laughed into her glass. A man in a gray suit said, "Probably here for the free dinner," and went back to buttering his bread. I have been called worse, in worse rooms by better people than them. I was once called nurse by a boy of 19 on a stretcher who wanted his mother and got me instead, and I was enough for him that night. So a girl named Brielle and a table of strangers did not move me much. I had stood in louder dark than this. I knew the difference between noise and danger, and this was only noise. I had told her my name when I walked in. "Marjorie Hale," I said. "I believe I'm on the list." She ran a glittered fingernail down 2 pages clipped to a little podium and said, "There's no Hale here." I almost smiled. There was a Hale all over that building, printed in gold on the program in her hand. But there was no Hale on Brielle's list, and that, it turned out, was exactly how somebody wanted it. So I did not argue. I never do. I have a thing I say to myself. 3 words my husband used to tease me about. I don't make scenes. I keep records. I stepped back against the wall by the coat check, set my clutch flat against my middle, and I waited because she had told me to wait. And waiting has never once cost me anything I couldn't spare. My name is Marjorie Hale. I am 77 years old. I gave 31 years to the United States Army as a flight nurse and a combat hospital matron, and I have the spine to show for it, the kind that aches a day before it rains. That evening I drove in from my brick rancher off Winton Road in a Buick with 14 years and 190,000 miles on it. I parked it myself, 2 blocks down past the bank, because the valet line was for the gowns and I have never minded a walk. On the way in, I had driven past the edge of Fort Moore, past the parade field where I once stood at attention in cold rain, until a colonel finished a speech nobody remembered by supper. I pressed my service uniform that afternoon on the same ironing board I have used for 40 years. It still fit, more or less. The ribbons still sat where they belonged. I am told now that an old woman in a uniform looks like a child playing dress-up. Nobody who has actually worn one has ever thought that. But I had not come to be looked at. I had come because of 4 words in the newspaper. 3 days before, the Columbus Ledger-Inquirer ran a half-page on the Gala. Eagle Star Veterans Relief, it said, would honor the families of the fallen and celebrate the local funds that carried them. Down in the fine print, between the caterer and the list of sponsors, were 4 words I had not seen in public in 19 years. The Hale Heroes Fund. My husband built that fund. Sergeant Major Ray Hale, 30 years in the Army, the hardest soft man the good Lord ever made. We built it together at our kitchen table off Winton Road, him with a yellow legal pad and a bad pen, me with the coffee and the arithmetic. back when the whole thing was a shoebox of folded checks and a promise we made to each other after a funeral. Ray has been gone a long time now. I came that night to hear his name said out loud in a bright room full of people. That was the whole of it. A small thing to want. I touched the clutch where the letter was. I have carried that letter 19 years, folded in 3, the creases gone soft as cloth. I know every word of it by heart and have never once needed to prove I did. I did not come to use it. I came to listen. I want that understood because of everything that happened after. They had built a memorial wall just inside the doors, in the same corner where Brielle had parked me, which I suppose was the one accidental kindness of the night. Tall black panels, white names. The local fallen, going back to the first war in the Gulf and forward to a boy lost last year. Guests walked past it on their way to the bar the way you walk past a fire hydrant. I read it. I read all of it, top to bottom, the way I read a chart, no skipping, because a name is the last thing a person leaves behind, and somebody ought to. On the third panel was a name I knew. They had spelled it right. They had the date wrong. It said he was killed on the 9th of a hot month I will never forget. And he was not. He came into us on the 9th. He left us on the 10th, at 20 minutes past 2 in the morning. And I know that because I was the one holding the lamp, and I wrote the time down myself, the way I write everything down. 1 day off. To a mother, 1 day is the whole world. It is the difference between the last day you had him and the first day you did not. I can still smell that tent when I close my eyes. Canvas and antiseptic and the fine dust that got into the coffee, the gauze, your teeth. I can hear the rotors coming in low. I will not tell you the rest of it. The rest of it is not for a ballroom. But I was there, on the 10th, at 20 past 2, and the wall was wrong. There was a boy at the coat check, 18 or so, bored half to sleep on a stool. I asked if I could borrow his pen. He handed it over without looking up from his phone. On the little printed cards they had set out for guests to take home, the same wrong date sat under the same right name. I uncapped the pen, and I changed the 9 to a 10. Small and neat, the way you correct a chart so the next nurse who reads it can trust her own eyes. Then I capped the pen and handed it back. I did not tell the boy why. I did not tell anybody. Some corrections are not for the room. They are for the man and for the woman somewhere who is still counting the days from the wrong one. A young fellow in a vest was handing out programs to the people who belonged. He passed me by, which was fair enough, since I was furniture by then. But one had been left on the coat check counter, and I am a woman who reads what is said in front of her. I picked it up and opened it. The cover said, Eagle Star Veterans Relief, 19th Annual Gala. Inside was a letter from the chair, a woman named Sloane Vance, beside a glossy photograph of herself in a long red gown. Our mission, she had written, has always been deeply personal to me. Then a list of the evening's honors, the sponsors, the silent auction, and there, near the bottom, set in the same gold ink Brielle had been holding by the door, was the Hail Heroes Fund, listed now as a program of Eagle Star, stewarded by the Vance family since its founding. I read that line 3 times. Stewarded by the Vance family since its founding. I founded it. Ray and I founded it at our kitchen table, with a shoebox and a legal pad, the year this Sloane Vance was likely still picking a dress for her own prom. There was no Hale in the building, according to the girl at the door. But the Hale name was on the program, in gold, with a stranger's family standing in the spot where my husband used to stand. I should have felt nothing. I am very good at feeling nothing where people can see me. I felt the old, slow heat start up under my breastbone anyway, the one I learned to set aside during long surgeries, and I set it aside now. I turned the page. to the part where the program listed the year's giving, the dollars raised, and the good they claimed it had done. And my eye stopped. My eye has counted pills and pulses and the failing beats of young hearts for 31 years, and it does not slide past a number that will not add. This one would not add. The amount they said came in did not match the amount they said went out, and the gap between them was not small, and it was not the kind of gap an honest ledger leaves behind. I read it again, slower. Then I reached into my clutch, past the soft old letter, and took out the cheap phone my neighbor set up for me with the big print. Brielle was still at the door, smiling at the gowns. The chandeliers were still burning. Somewhere across that bright room, a woman in red was telling a table how personal all of this was to her. And I, the nobody by the door, leaned back against the wall where they had told me to wait, and I began, very quietly, to count. The cheap phone woke slow, the way I do these days. Dale next door, who is 60 and treats me as though I were spun from glass, had set the letters on it big and dark, and I have never once told him how grateful I am for that, because he would only wave it off and go back to his lawnmower. I held the thing low against my clutch, the screen turned in toward my chest. Nobody studies an old woman looking at her phone. They think she is playing a card game or frowning at a picture of a grandchild she will show you whether you ask to see it or not. Let them think it. I was reading the public record of the state of Georgia, and the public record does not care what gown you wore in. A charity is a glass house, if you know which window to look through. Ray taught me that, back when ours was still a shoebox under the bed. Anybody who takes the people's money has to show the people where it went every year, on a form with a number where its name ought to be. I have filled out that form by hand at my own kitchen table off Winton Road, in pencil first, and then in ink, Ray reading the lines over my shoulder and getting them wrong on purpose to make me swat at him. I know that form the way I know the back of a thermometer. I knew exactly which window to look through, and I cupped my hand around the glow and looked. The Hail Heroes Fund had its own little history on that website, going back 19 years, clean as a made bed. I scrolled through our early years the way you turn the pages of an album. Small numbers, honest numbers. Money in from a church spaghetti supper, money out to a widow in Phoenix City who couldn't make her power bill the winter her husband didn't come home. Money in from a motorcycle ride that started at a bar on Victory Drive. Money out for a headstone. Every dollar that came in our door went back out our door to a family that needed it, minus the stamps. That was the whole machine. That was Ray's whole religion, and mine. Then, 4 years back, the pages changed hands. The fund stopped filing on its own and folded up underneath Eagle Star Veterans Relief, the way a creek folds into a river and loses its name. And the numbers, which had always been small and square and true, began to swell and slide. Donations poured in now. People are generous to a thing with chandeliers. Last year alone, the program said it had taken in better than $400,000 in the Hale name. 400,000. Ray and I never saw a tenth of that in our best year, and I felt something lift in my chest at the thought of all those families, until I followed the money down the page to see where it had gone. It had not gone to the families. That is where the counting started to hurt. I read the lines the way I once read a chart at 3 in the morning, slow, no skipping, my finger moving under each figure. Of every dollar that came in under my husband's fund, only a thin, mean trickle reached a single grieving soul. The rest went sideways. Event production, venue consulting, creative direction, strategic hospitality. Pretty words, the kind that mean nothing and cost everything. And every one of them paid out to the same place, a company, an outfit called Vance Signature Events. I sat with that name a moment. Outside, past the coat check and the glass doors, I could hear downtown Columbus going on with its evening. A car horn down on Broadway, the river running its slow brown self toward Alabama. Inside, somewhere across all those white roses, a woman in a long red gown was telling a table how personal all of this was to her. I did not have to wonder who owned Vance Signature Events. The program had already told me, stewarded by the Vance family since its founding. She had built a faucet out of my husband's name, and she had run it straight into her own pocket. I want to tell you, I was surprised. I was not. I have lived 77 years and buried more good people than I can hold in one prayer, and the one lesson that never stops repeating is that a beautiful room is the easiest place in the world to hide an ugly thing. What surprised me was how careless she had been. She had not even troubled to hide it well, because she had counted on a simple thing. She had counted on nobody who knew the difference ever being allowed past the door. She had counted, that very night, on a girl named Brielle, keeping the one woman alive who could read this ledger penned against a wall by the coat check, holding a clutch, told to wait. A waiter drifted past with a tray of waters in tall glasses beaded with sweat. He was young, with a kind, tired face, and he slowed and held the tray a little toward me without being asked. "You all right standing, ma'am? There's a chair by the wall there if you want it." I told him I was fine, and thank you, and I meant the thank you more than he knew, because he was the first person in that whole bright room to look at me as if I were a person and not a draft coming in under the door. He set a glass on the coat check counter beside me anyway, in case, and went on. I have remembered smaller kindnesses for longer. Then she walked by. Sloane Vance herself, close enough that I could have touched the red silk of her, close enough to smell the perfume coming off her in waves, something with money in it. She was moving fast and laughing at something over her shoulder, a phone pressed to her ear, the chairwoman in her element, and she did not so much as turn her head toward the old woman by the wall. Why would she? I was the furniture she had ordered. She swept past me the way the living sweep past a name on a memorial, and she never knew that the one hand in that ballroom that could close her faucet for good was 8 inches from her elbow, resting flat on a clutch she had made certain stayed shut. You have likely already decided what was in that clutch. Hold that thought gently. It is heavier than you think, because here is the part she had not counted on, the part that turned a snub into something with a name and a number. The piece of paper I have carried folded in 3 for 19 years is not a keepsake. It is not a love letter, though I have loved it like one. It is the deed to the thing Ray built. He drew it up the year before he passed, when his hands had started to shake and he had begun to think about the world going on without him in it. He was afraid of exactly this. He had seen the Sloanes of the world before, the smooth ones who circle a good cause the way a buzzard circles, and he sat me down at our kitchen table and he said, "Margie, I am going to fix it so that no charming stranger can ever back a truck up to this and drive off with it." And he did. He wrote it so the fund could never be moved, spent, borrowed against, or handed off without one signature. One. And that signature was not the bank's, and it was not a board's, and it surely was not a Vance's. It was mine, only ever mine. Set down in words a court would have to honor, words I will let a better voice than mine read aloud before this night is over. In 4 years I had never signed a thing. No one had so much as mailed me a form. No one had called my house off Winton Road. No one had driven the 8 miles to ask the woman whose name was on the gold ink in their own program whether she might please lend her hand to moving $400,000 of other people's grief. They had not asked, because to ask me would have been to remind the room that I existed, and a faucet only runs clean as long as nobody checks who owns the pipe. which meant every dollar that had left my husband's fund and landed at Vance Signature Events had left it without the one signature the law required. Every single one. It was not a snub anymore. It had not been a snub since I opened that program. A snub is a thing that happens to your feelings. This was a thing that happens to a person in a courtroom, and I was holding the reason in both hands. I set the phone down on the counter, face down, beside the waiter's glass of water, and I breathed the way I taught 100 frightened young soldiers to breathe. In through the nose, slow, hold it, let it down easy. The old heat was up under my breastbone again, the slow one, and I banked it the way I have always banked it. I do not make scenes. I keep records. I had the record now. I had it screenshotted and saved, page by page, the way you preserve a wound site before you dress it, so that nobody can later say it did not look the way it looked. What I needed was not noise. Noise is cheap, and noise is what a room like that knows how to swallow. A weeping old woman, a raised voice, a finger pointed across the white roses, and Brielle would have me out on the Broadway sidewalk in 90 seconds, and they would all murmur about the poor thing and order their dessert. Noise would have handed Sloane Vance exactly the ending she had written for me at the door. What I needed was accuracy, delivered into the one moment and the one set of hands where accuracy could not be swept under a tablecloth. So I waited, the way she had told me to. Waiting has never once cost me a thing I could not spare. And while I waited, the doors at the head of the ballroom opened, and the evening changed its weather. You feel a thing like that before you understand it. The talk thinned. Heads turned toward the entrance the way a field of wheat turns when the wind crosses it. A small knot of men in dark suits had come in, and at the center of them walked a tall man, straight-backed, gray at the temples, in the dress blues of the United States Army with a row of ribbons that told a story to anyone who could read them, and 4 silver stars riding each shoulder like a verdict. The keynote. The program had a name beside that face, and I had read it an hour ago without my heart catching. General Brenner. I had not placed it then. I placed it now, and my hand went still on the counter. I knew that face. It was older, and it was harder, and it had been worn by 40 years of weather and command. But I knew it the way a mother knows a grown son in a crowd. I had seen it last under a different light, a swinging lamp in a canvas tent that smelled of dust and antiseptic, the face of a boy who was not supposed to live until morning, gone gray as ash, gripping my wrist hard enough to leave marks while the rotors came in low, and I told him the same lie I told all of them, the kindest lie I know. You are going to be just fine. Stay with me. Look at my face and stay. He had stayed. I did not know his name had been Brenner. To me, he had been a blood pressure and a pulse I refused to let go of, one of the ones who lived, and I had not let myself wonder after him, because a nurse who wonders after every face she saves does not last 31 years. But I had held that lamp on the 9th and into the 10th, and the boy whose blood I knelt in was this man, and the date I had quietly corrected on a little printed card an hour ago belonged to the brother on the next table over, the one who did not stay, the one whose mother is somewhere tonight still counting from the wrong morning. General Brenner stopped just inside the doors. He did not move toward the dais, where a microphone waited and a woman in red had already half risen with her brightest smile fixed and ready. He stood very still, the way a man stands when something has reached him that the room cannot see, and slowly, deliberately, he began to turn his head, scanning the tables, the faces, the white roses, the chandeliers, looking for something he had not yet found and clearly meant to. I knew, the way you know a fever is coming before it breaks. that he was looking for me. And I knew I would not raise my hand or call out or take one step toward him to make it easier, because I had spent my whole life being the one who stays still and lets the moment come, and because there was a girl named Brielle between us who still believed she was guarding the door against a nobody. So I stood where they had put me, by the coat check, beside a stranger's kindness in a sweating glass, my clutch flat against my middle, and the whole weight of my husband's last gift folded inside it. And I waited for a 4-star general to find the woman he had last seen by the light of a swinging lamp. He found me the way morning finds a window, all at once and without any hurry at all. His eyes moved along the wall, past the coat check, past the kindness still sweating in its tall glass, and they came to rest on me, and they stayed. I have been looked at a great many ways in 77 years. I have been looked through. I have been looked past. I have been looked at the way you look at a chair you intend to move out of your path. I had not been looked at the way that man looked at me since the last morning. Ray opened his eyes and knew me, as though I were the one fixed thing in a room otherwise full of weather. Something happened to the general's face. The hard command of it gave way, just at the mouth, just at the corners of the eyes, the way river ice breaks first where the water underneath has been moving all along. Then he came toward me. He did not hurry, and he did not announce. He simply set down whatever he had been carrying behind that composed face and walked, and the room understood before the room had words for it that the keynote was not walking toward the dais. There had been music, a small string band off to the side of the ballroom, something genteel and forgettable that nobody listens to and everybody pays for. I heard it falter. One player and then the next lifted their bows and let the note thin out into nothing, the way a conversation dies when someone walks in carrying bad news. The talk went with it. By the time General Brenner had crossed half that floor, the only sound in the room was the sound of him crossing it, the measured fall of dress shoes on parquet, and the small, frightened rustle of 300 people realizing at once that they did not know what they were watching. He passed the long table where the woman in red had been holding court. He passed the white roses and the little flames in their glass chimneys. He passed a senator's aide and a man who owned half the car dealerships on Manchester Expressway, and not one of them got so much as the turn of his head. He walked the length of that bright, important room as though it were empty, and he stopped 3 feet in front of the old woman by the door they had told to wait, and he came to attention. I want you to see it the way I saw it, because I will not see a finer thing before they put me in the ground beside Ray. He squared himself. His heels came together with a sound like a latch closing, and that man, with 4 silver stars riding his shoulders and 40 years of other men's salutes banked behind his eyes, raised his right hand slow and exact to the brow of a 77-year-old woman in a pressed old uniform that a girl at the door had looked up and down and called nobody, and he held it there. He did not waver. A salute given in a hurry is a habit. A salute held is a sentence, and every soul in that ballroom read it. I heard, somewhere behind him, a glass set down too hard. I did not look to see whose. I came to attention the only way these old knees still allow, which is to say I straightened my spine the way 31 years taught me to straighten it, and I returned his salute, and I held it as long as he held his, and neither of us said one word. There is a kind of quiet that is louder than any noise a person can make. We stood in it together, the boy I had knelt beside in the dirt, and the woman who had refused to let go of his wrist, and we let it be as loud as it needed to be. Then he brought his hand down, and he spoke, and his voice was not the voice of a man addressing a room. It was lower than that, and it was meant for me, though the room had gone so still that the room got it too. "Major Hale," he said, "I have been trying to find you for 40 years." I told him, because it was true, and because my own voice had gone unsteady and I needed plain words to stand on, that he had grown taller than the last time I saw him. Something broke open in his face then, and he laughed, one short broken sound that was halfway to the other thing, and he shook his head. "You remember," he said. "I remember all of them," I told him, "the ones who stayed and the ones who didn't. I have never once been allowed to choose." He turned then, a quarter turn, so that he was speaking partly to me and partly to the 300 faces frozen at their tables, and he raised his voice just enough to give it to the room, because he had decided, I think, in that moment, that the room had not earned the right to keep wondering. In the spring of 1968, he said, I was carried into a surgical tent with a number on it instead of a name, somewhere I am still not permitted to tell you, and I was not expected to be carried out of it. I have read the report since. I was not a patient that night. I was a formality. He stopped. His jaw worked. There was a nurse who did not get the memo. She put her hands on me, and she told me I was going to be just fine, which was a lie. And she told me to look at her face and stay, which was not. I held onto her wrist hard enough to hurt her. I have wondered, my whole life, whether I left a mark. You did, I told him very quietly. I have it yet. The room made a sound, a single soft sound, 300 people exhaling at once. I never knew her name, the general went on, and now he was looking only at me again. They moved me out on the next bird before sunrise. By the time I thought to ask, the unit had rotated, and the war did what the war does, and the trail went cold. I made general officer. I have commanded more men than live in this city, and in 40 years there has not been one Memorial Day I have stood through without thinking about a woman whose face I would know in the dark and whose name I was never given. He paused. Hale, he said. It was on the program in my hand the whole drive over, the Hale Heroes Fund. I read it as a coincidence. I read it as somebody else's name. And here is the part I had not let myself feel until he said it, the part that put the first crack in my composure all night. Because while he spoke, I had been doing the arithmetic only I could do, the way I do it. Slow, no skipping. My mind moving down the page of that night, the way my finger had moved down the ledger an hour before. The 9th of the month into the 10th. 2 tables under one swinging lamp. The boy on the left who gripped my wrist and stayed. And the boy on the right. I had corrected a date on a little printed card an hour earlier, by the door, with a pen a stranger lent me. Because the program had a name on it I knew, and a date beside that name that was wrong by a day. I had not made a scene about it. I do not make scenes. I keep records, and a record that is wrong is a wound that never closes for the people who have to live beside it. The name on that card belonged to the boy on the right, the one who did not stay, and the date they had carved under him, the date some committee had pulled off a form and never once checked against the truth, was the 9th. But he did not leave us on the 9th. He held on past midnight, the way his brother on the next table held on, the only difference being which one God gave back. He left us in the small gray hours of the 10th, and his mother, wherever she is tonight, has spent 50 years lighting a candle on the wrong morning, grieving one day early because nobody who knew better was ever in the room. I knew better. I was in the room. I have always been in the room, and they had stood me by the door. The date, I said to General Brenner, and my voice did the thing I had not let it do all evening. On the card, for Daniel, they had it as the 9th. The general went very still. It was the 10th, I said. He stayed longer than they wrote down. He was braver than his paperwork. I fixed it tonight, before your people came in. I borrowed a pen. I am not ashamed to tell you my eyes had filled, and that I let them, because some things you do not blink away to keep your face tidy for a room that called you furniture. I have been correcting that boy's death for 50 years in my own mind. Tonight, I finally had a pen and a card in front of me, and I did it on paper, and I thought no one would ever know I had. For a moment, the four-star general of the United States Army could not speak. He is a big man and a hard one, made by a hard life, and he stood in front of me in his dress blues with his ribbons telling their long story, and he could not make a single word come out. When he did, it was barely above a whisper. "Daniel was my brother," he said. I had known it the second I matched his face to that lamp. I had known it, and I had said the date anyway, because he had the right to it more than he had the right to be spared it. "Not by blood," he said, getting himself back, giving the words to the room now because his voice would not stay private any longer. "We came up together. We enlisted on the same morning at the same table in Macon. He was on the litter beside mine that night. I have spent my life being the one who got carried out, and I never knew until this woman said his name out loud 30 seconds ago that the morning my family has mourned him on for half a century is the wrong morning." He looked at me as though I had handed him something he had been reaching for in the dark his entire life. "You gave him an extra day," he said. "You gave it back to all of us." "I did not give him anything," I said. "I only kept the record straight. Somebody has to." And there, in the held breath of that ruined, beautiful evening, I felt the whole night turn over on its hinge. An hour before, I had been a draft under the door. Now 300 people were looking at me the way you look at something you are afraid you have been standing too close to without knowing its name. Brielle, the girl from the door, had come unstuck from her post and drifted halfway into the room, both hands pressed over her mouth, her clipboard hanging forgotten from 2 fingers. And the look on her young face was not cruelty anymore. It was the dawning, sickened understanding of a person who has just watched the floor open under the very spot where she made her little stand. But I was not watching Brielle. Over the general's shoulder, at the head table, beneath the chandelier she had paid for with other people's grief, I was watching a woman in a long red gown. Sloane Vance had risen from her chair. She had her smile back on. "I will give her that much, and it is the only thing I will ever give her." Whatever had collapsed in her face when the music died, she had hauled it back up into place by main force, the way you wrestle a tarp back over a load in a rising wind, and she was already moving, already reaching, with the bright, relentless poise of a woman who has talked her way out of every room she was ever caught in. She came around the end of the long table with her hand already lifting toward the dais, toward the microphone that waited under its little light, and I understood exactly what she meant to do. She meant to take the moment back. She meant to step up to that podium and fold this strange and dangerous turn of events into her own story, to thank the general for his beautiful tribute, to dab her eye and tell the room how this right here, was everything the Hail Heroes Fund stood for, and to drown the truth in the warm bath of her own voice before anybody in that room thought to ask the one question that would end her. She climbed the 2 steps to the dais. She laid her hand on the microphone. The little light caught the red of her gown and the white of her teeth, and she leaned in, gracious, glittering, in command of her glass house for one last minute, and she began to speak about how personal all of this was to her. I let her. I stood by the door where she had put me, with the general beside me and the whole turned room around me, and I slid my hand into my clutch, passed the cheap phone full of her ledger, and I closed my fingers around a letter folded in three that I have carried for 19 years. I do not make scenes. I was about to keep a record straight in front of 300 witnesses, and I meant to let her say every last word first. Sloane Vance had a lovely voice, and she knew the worth of it down to the penny. She let it come over those 300 faces soft and warm as bathwater, and she told them that what they had just witnessed was the truest, most moving thing she had ever been privileged to host under her own roof. She thanked the general for his beautiful and spontaneous tribute. She said that evenings exactly like this one were the entire reason she had given her years to Eagle Star Veterans Relief. She pressed her ringed hand flat against the red silk over her heart, and she said the word sacred, and she said the word family, and not one muscle of that practiced face knew it was lying. Then she said my husband's name. She did not know it was my husband's name. To her, it was a brass line on a program, a department, a charity tucked inside her charity. She spoke of the Hail Heroes Fund, the way a woman reads a street sign on her way to somewhere she would rather be. And she told the room how proud Eagle Star was to steward that good and growing legacy. And somewhere in the middle of the word stewardship, I felt the last of my patience go quiet and lie down. Ray built that fund with his pension and his Rolodex and 4 years of Saturday mornings on our kitchen telephone off Winton Road. I typed the letters, I licked the stamps. We never put our name where the public could see it, because the name was never the point. The point was a young private who came home to Columbus with both legs gone north of a place I am still not allowed to tell you, and got himself a parade, and then got nothing, and needed a check for a ramp before the first hard frost. That was the point. That had always been the point. She talked for 4 minutes, and I let her have every second of all 4. There is a discipline in letting a person finish. I had stood at the foot of a great many beds and learned that you let a thing run its whole course before you read out what it came to. When she was done, she did the small, graceful things that had carried her out of every other room she was ever cornered in. The little catch of the breath, the lashes lowered just so, the half step back from the microphone to make room for the love she expected to come rolling up at her out of the dark. And the room sat on its hands. Nobody was looking at the woman in red beneath all that light. They were still looking at the old woman by the coat check, and Sloane Vance felt it the way you feel the air go cold at the back of your neck, and the smile stayed nailed where it was, while everything behind it began, very slightly, to slide. I did not go to the microphone. I have stood beside more dying men than I can count, and I have never once needed to be amplified. I crossed the little stretch of floor to General Brenner, and I worked the clasp of my clutch with 2 fingers that no longer bend the way they did, and I drew out the thing I have carried folded in 3 since the April 19 years ago, when they handed me a flag off the top of Ray's coffin. The paper has gone soft as cloth along the creases. I set it in the general's hands, and I told him, low, that he had best be the one to read it, because nothing true would be believed in that room tonight if it came out of the mouth of nobody. He unfolded it under the small light of the dais. I watched his eyes find the top of the first page and stop. He read the whole of it through once to himself before he would speak a single word of it out loud. The way a careful man handles live ordnance. There were 2 pages. The first was the deed of endowment, drawn up by a lawyer on Broadway the year before Ray got sick, set down on the heavy cream stock he kept for things that mattered, stamped and signed and notarized with a raised seal you could read with the pad of your thumb in a dark room. The second page was in Ray's own hand. General Brenner lifted the first page until the light took it, and he read one line off it, slow, in the voice that had once moved divisions across borders. The fund shall have one trustee, he read, sole and irrevocable, holding exclusive authority over every disbursement, and that trustee is named herein as Marjorie Hale. He let it stand in the air. Then he turned the page out toward the room, the way you turn a card face up at the close of a long hand, and he said, so that the back tables got it too, that the paper in his fingers was the founding instrument of the Hale Heroes Fund, and that the fund was no program of Eagle Star Veterans Relief at all. It was its own trust, whole and separate. Eagle Star had only ever been paid to keep its books, and by the plain black words on that cream page, not $1 could leave that fund. Not for a ramp, not for a rent check, not for so much as a tank of gas, without the signature of its one and only trustee. I had signed nothing. I had not been asked to sign a single thing in 19 years, because every quarter a tidy little statement came to my mailbox off Winton Road, showing the fund sitting quiet and whole, gathering its small interest, doing its slow good in the world. I keep my statements. I keep everything. It was only that very night, penned beside that door with my reading glasses and a borrowed phone, that I had thought to pull the public filings and found that the paper mailed to a harmless old widow and the money living in the real accounts had quietly stopped telling each other the same story some years back. If you have decided the unkindest thing done to me that night was a young woman pointing me at a door, you have hold of the smallest corner of it. The unkind thing had 6 figures on it. A man stood up at a table near the back, an ordinary man in an ordinary gray suit who had eaten his chicken all evening and said nothing to anybody. He gave his name, which I will spare you, and then he said the few words that pulled the blood straight out of Sloane Vance's lovely face. He was with the Charity Enforcement Division of the state, he said, and his office had opened a review of Eagle Star's accounts that very week. He asked the young fellow at the laptop by the stage, very politely, if he would put up the page he had flagged. The slideshow of smiling veterans that had been turning over on the big screen all night blinked away, and in its place rose one line of a bank statement, set tall enough for the last row to read. One line. It needed no company. A transfer, dated the autumn before, leaving the Hale Heroes Fund and landing in an account belonging to Vance Signature Events, which anyone in Columbus who reads the society pages knows is the failing party business with Sloane Vance's own name lettered on the door. The figure beside it was the kind of figure that would build a ramp onto every cold house in Muscogee County, and it had gone instead to chair covers and someone's overdue rent. The room made no sound at all. Then it made the sound of 300 people turning in their seats at once to look at the woman on the dais. Sloane Vance is not a stupid woman. I will grant her the very last of my charity and tell you that she understood, in the time it takes a candle to gutter, that there was no voice lovely enough on this earth to talk her clear of one projected line and a notarized seal. She opened her mouth. She got as far as the front of my name, the mar of it, reaching even then for some warm sentence to fold me back into her story. And then she looked over her own shoulder at her own company's name standing 2 feet high in light, and whatever she had meant to say simply left her where she stood. She set the microphone down on the podium with a soft knock that the silence made enormous. She did not run. She came down the side steps of that dais and went along the wall and out through a service door beside the kitchen, alone, in her red gown, and not one hand in that room reached to stop her, and I took no satisfaction in watching her go. The man in the gray suit crossed to me a moment later and told me, quiet, that the accounts had been frozen as of that hour, and that the trust answered to no one now but me. The girl from the door, Brielle, had not followed her aunt out. She was standing where the tables thinned toward the entrance with both arms wrapped around her clipboard, like a child clutching a school book, crying without any sound, the way a young person cries when the thing she has done has gotten suddenly and permanently bigger than she is. When the room finally began to breathe and murmur and move, she came across the floor to me. She made no speech. She is young, and the young believe the whole sky has come down when they have only dropped one dish. She took my elbow the way you would help any grandmother over a curb, and she drew out a chair at the nearest table and settled me into it. And she whispered that she was sorry. Only that. I told her to sit herself down a minute too, because she had gone the gray of the tablecloth. Whatever her aunt had turned out to be, this was a child, and I have never in my life been able to walk off and leave a frightened young person standing alone in the wreck of a bad night. General Brenner came and lowered himself into the chair beside mine with the second page still in his hand. Ray's page, written in pencil and pen both because Ray wrote the way he talked, starting a thing one way and ending it stronger. He asked if he might read it. I told him the page was mine, but he could read me aloud the part that was not. He found it, and his big voice came down soft. Ray had written that he was building the trust this way, one name on it, and that name mine, sole and irrevocable, because he had spent 30 years watching smooth people work their hands into good money meant for hard-used men, and he would not leave me or the fund standing open to the first charming soul who came along with a clipboard and a need. He had written that he was sorry he would not be here to stand himself between me and that kind of person. He had written that the clause was him standing there anyway. He had been gone 19 years, and he had just walked the length of a ballroom in Columbus and put his arm around me in front of everyone. I had spent a long life keeping quiet and keeping count, holding doors and minding lists and standing wherever I was set down. Somewhere between that coat check and this chair, I had simply stopped. I stopped waiting to be let in. I stopped holding doors for people who would never once have held one for me. Before I left, I asked the general for one thing. There is a wall in the lobby of that hotel, a long black panel the committee rents for the gala each year. The county's fallen set into it in white, and 300 people in good clothes pass it on the way to the bar, and not 3 of them ever stop to read it. I had read it on the way in. Daniel's name is there, and the date cut beside it was the wrong one, the 9th, the same untruth that has sat on his mother's calendar for 50 years. I told General Brenner. He said nothing. He walked me out to that wall and found a man with a key to the case. And before the valet had brought my Buick around the front, the white characters of that date had been lifted off and reset to the truth. The 10th, with no ceremony and no microphone, only the 2 of us and a janitor on a step stool. A record made right at last in a place where it will stand long after all of us are gone. I folded Ray's letter back along its 19-year creases and set it down inside my clutch. Then I walked out through the front doors they had told me to wait beside.